Day 11, Sunday, May 16th, 1937.
Was up at 6:45 and helped Father McNally say Mass, after which we had a very sumptuous breakfast. I say sumptuous because we are all going ashore to live, and I know that we shall not have breakfasts like the ones we have had aboard ship. Redressed Lieutenant Williamson's eye, and then packed my stuff and over to the camp.
Sunday morning, our first Sunday on shore, with the early sun shining through the low-hanging clouds and the gentle murmur of the water on the beach. Father McNally was holding divine worship.
The camp is a beautiful sight now. The neat little trim tents in 2 rows paralleling the beach and about 20 yards from the water's edge. At the far end, away from the dock and toward the seaside, is the mess tent, and just to the right of that are the few palm trees and the tattered British flag of which I made mention earlier in this opus. As soon as we arrived in camp this morning, George Hicks was just about ready to begin his radio broadcast, and several of the scientists, the carpenter's mate, the mess boy, and myself said a few words. The engineers have rigged a small portable broadcasting outfit in one of the tents, and they send to the ship where it is picked up and relayed to California, where it is distributed to the networks of NBC.
This is the Eclipse expedition of the National Geographic Society and the United States Navy, speaking from a South Sea island. This is WMES shortwave transmitter, owned and operated by the National Broadcasting Company, with George Hicks announcing, sending from Canton Island in the Phoenix Group, 3 degrees south of the equator, longitude 171 degrees west, calling the United States and wishing to transmit again over NBC's regular network station. We're speaking to you now from Canton Island, on the shore. It's 9:30 in the morning here, halfway around the world from you. We're standing at the opening of one of the 20 brown neat tents set in 3 rows in our rapidly growing camp. It's another hot, bright day, like everyone seems to be. The sky is soft blue with lovely scattered clouds at the horizons, and the scientists at this time of the morning, at 8 o'clock when the eclipse will be here, always look with worry at these clouds. The sea is very calm and glittering this morning, and between 2 trees is planted a tattered British flag on a staff. 2 water boxes on the beach with the words painted on their side, New Zealand Eclipse Expedition of 1937. This is evidently the Australian party of scientists which we have expected at the islands to study the eclipse. They've left their water supply here earlier and will probably return later, as their study is not quite as extensive as ours. Our camp is rapidly growing. We've only arrived at Canton Island 3 days ago, Thursday. Perhaps you can hear the sailors pounding and sawing on the frame of a long building, which will contain several workrooms in the top room and a house for Dr. Dunham and his spectrograph. He and Mr. Thompson will be working in a dark room and will not even see the eclipse with their own eyes. We're even going to have electric light later, used also for the scientific instruments from a 1-kilowatt farm lighting unit. Dr. H.A. Gross, surgeon of the United States Navy, who's been assigned to our party, what do you think of our camp position here from a health standpoint?
I think it's ideal, Mr. Hicks. Outside of the few coral lacerations the boys have got, and probably a little consolation to the members that have gotten a bit sunburned, I think everything will be just fine.
Now our time is up, and we're here on the island, and we're here for a month, and I guess there's nothing more to say except so long. All right, this is George Hicks speaking of programs through facilities of the National Broadcasting Company.
After the ceremony was over, I took a shovel and went back to my grave digging. What I am primarily interested in is to see if this marked spot, marked just as though it were a grave, really contains a skeleton, and if possible to see if there are any identifying articles in the grave. Worked hard down in the hot sun digging the sand and coral blocks, and finally came down to a piece of wood, which is apparently the side of the coffin, but I was so tired that I could do no more. I don't know what the men would think if they knew what I was doing, so I covered up the portion of wood and called it quits for a while. Went back to the ship after stripping down and washing off in the clear water at the end of the dock. As soon as I reached the ship, I changed clothes and took a shower and sat down to the noonday meal, which started off with fried ulu, just a portion of the fish, which we caught over the side. It's a shame that all the fish that we catch can't be used or saved. They would be worth a lot of money back in Honolulu. I forgot to mention that on the evening of the 12th, I got the boys in the crew all together and suggested we get up a pool for the fishing period. Each man puts in a quarter, and the man catching the largest fish exclusive of sharks, turtles, and eels gets 4/5 of the pool, and the man catching the next largest fish gets 1/5 of the pool. So far, the biggest fish was caught by a man by the name of Knight, and it weighed 43.5 pounds. The pool now contains $13.75. That will be a nice purse if some sailor wins it. It wouldn't be a bad purse if I won it. Came back to the island with all my belongings to set up my home for the next month. After supper and when the sun had almost set, I went back to my digging and worked for about half an hour and was rewarded by coming down upon the femur of the skeleton. But it was so dark that if I had continued further, I might miss something. So I pulled some debris over my find and went back to camp. Tomorrow, while all the men are working, I shall go back and see what more I can uncover. Maybe I haven't made myself clear upon this ghoulish work. You see, the map of this island shows only one grave on it, and this one I am working on is directly across the island from the one which is designated. So this resting place was either not here when the map was made in 1924, or else it had been overlooked by the man who made the map. It certainly would be interesting if I could discover who he was and when he died. He may be some member of the crew of the ship which was shipwrecked here years ago, or he may have died here more recently, though I am inclined to think that the former supposition is probably most likely from the appearance of the wood of the rough box. Comparing the wood that is on the ground and that which has been under 3 or 4 feet of sand and coral, and having been dampened by 30 inches of rain each year for years, it is not too much in a creative mind to assume that they are both of the same lot. In either case, the work will not be wholly in, because it will give a little more to the map, which we now have of this largest of the Phoenix group of islands. The men are working very diligently on the large photographic laboratory, which is on the beach side of the rows of tents and set at an angle of 45 degrees to the line of tents. It is about 50 by 20 feet and has 3 rooms in it and a hallway from which entrance to the rooms may be gained through doors so that no light will get in. It is rather modern because they have installed an air conditioning unit in it to keep the water and temperature at an even keel during their work. The whole structure is made of rough lumber and is being lined with cannock and covered on the outside with roofing paper. The roof is flat, but with the air conditioning unit that should present no serious difficulty. It was delightfully cool, and except for the crawling of the hermit crabs dragging their snail shell protection over the coral-strewn ground, and the occasional screech of the frigate and boobies, this spot was as serene as any cemetery. It is surprising how cool it really is, because one is just comfortable sleeping on a mattress and being covered by a sheet and one woolen blanket folded double. And so, to bed feeling rather tired, and in no time at all, I was fast asleep.
Day 12, Monday, May 17th, 1937.
Up early and a hearty breakfast of hot cakes and molasses. Busy around the camp getting the tent in better shape, and made myself a shelf on which to put my medical supplies. It isn't much. I have a few rolls of bandage, some iodine and alcohol, aspirin, and a few splints. So far, all I have had to do is caution a few of the men about too much exposure, and even at that, several of them have quite nasty burns, especially of the lips. You see, our camp is situated right on a level strip of coral and the glare of the sun. From the coral is exactly the same as the direct rays of the sun. We tested that by using a movie photometer, and it gave the same reading off the coral as when it was held up directly to the sun.
The only trees near us were half-dozen sad-looking coconut palms that would afford no shelter from the blistering tropical sun. In fact, the disintegrated coral reflected the sun's rays so thoroughly that we got a double dose of the sun's heat. However, the temperatures were not high, for the ever-blowing trade winds blew over the waters of the lagoon, so that the temperature ranged from about 80 degrees Fahrenheit at night to 85 degrees at midday. Day by day, good weather continued. Our camp life ran smoothly. Busy as the proverbial bees were the scientists, some of whom, even in the 3 weeks before the eclipse, barely had time to do all that was necessary to adjust their delicate instruments.
Took a nap in the afternoon right after chow and had the nicest dreams. Thought I was home. Kept pretty well to my tent during the rest of the afternoon, getting things straightened out, and then after the sun had set, I went back to my digging. I started at the other end of the hole and came down upon the skull, which I removed after having had to clear out landslide after landslide of sand out of the way. The skull was in perfect shape, and the teeth had no fillings at all. Apparently a young man, or else one who had taken exceptionally good care of his teeth. The mandible, or lower jaw, was broken in half to one side of the midline, and just when I removed it, another landslide fell in and covered things so completely that it would have taken at least half an hour's work. So I quit and put the skull under several big coral heads and covered it with some of the lowest growing vegetation. I'll go back soon as the opportunity presents itself, and see if I can find any rings on the phalanges. Back to camp and supper, after which several of us played bridge again until 9 o'clock, and then I went to bed.
It is rumored that the islands are overrun by rats cast ashore from some old wreck. So a shotgun and 500 rounds of ammunition have been provided.
Captain Hellwig had been forewarned about rats and had brought a shotgun with 500 shells. Few were shot, however. With only 500 shells, one could do little more than fire a salute in the creature's honor.
One group played bridge in the mess tent every night. Sometimes I went rat shooting. The fishermen would go down to the entrance to the lagoon and try to catch a big one in the racing current.
Day 13, Tuesday, May 18th, 1937, 3 weeks until the eclipse.
Up feeling rather tired after a poor night's rest. I read until after 10 and thought I was pretty sleepy, but every little noise seemed to awaken me. Even the hermit crabs clinking their way across the ground seemed to disturb me.
Dr. Richmeyer needed a heavier weight for his driving clock, so he made it out of old rusty iron from a ship that had been wrecked on the island.
After chow, I came back to my tent and lay down for an hour or so, but couldn't sleep because of the noise the men were making while they were working. Got up about 2 o'clock and built a form for the base of a telescope. The men poured the concrete after I finished it and set it up. Late in the evening, I put a finish on the top of it. Dr. Gardner has a stiff neck, so before I turned in, I massaged it well for about 20 minutes and then gave him some aspirin and codeine. To bed about 10 o'clock. Forgot to mention that McCarthy, the cook's helper, cut his index finger on a tin can, stuck it together with some adhesive tape.
Day 14, Wednesday, May 19th, 1937.
Up early and busy about the camp, and made myself a little desk on which to set this typewriter, and also used as a wash stand. The top is made of a packing box set flat, the open side of which serves as a drawer for my typewriter and paper. On the right side of it, I hang my toothbrush, and on the left side, my wash basin, and above that, I made a little shelf to hold my soap and shaving gear. My whiskers have grown quite considerably, so I had a very leisurely shave this morning. Sort of makes you feel like a new man. One of these days I am going to wash my head. The salt from the water has made it feel as though I have grease in my hair, and each time I run a comb through it, I get about a quarter of a teaspoonful of salt out of it. It was hot as the devil, so waited until the sun was pretty low before I left the tent. Helped Dr. Gardner put his telescopic camera together, and then watched the boys pour the concrete for a large telescope stand. On either side of the block of concrete will be embedded 2 enameled American flags, and on either end will be embedded 2 medals of the National Geographic Society. I am going to put the finishing touches to it. I forgot to mention that just as the last load of concrete was being poured, someone got the bright idea of putting all of our names in a bottle and embedding it in the concrete. So hurriedly we got paper and opened up the typewriter and got all the names of the men in it. And then we had our pictures taken as Captain Hellwig was putting the paper in the bottle which I was holding. As soon as the concrete was poured, George Hicks and I ate an early chow with the men and then went fishing down in the channel. Forgot to mention that one of the sharks was a tiger shark. You knew, of course, that sharks are not regular fish in that they give birth to young sharks instead of laying eggs. Nearly every one of the sharks we caught were females, and each had at least half-dozen young sharks inside of them. The boys ripped them open and used the young ones as live bait for the next one.
Day 15, Thursday, May 20th, 1937.
Piddled around camp all morning, and then after lunch took a nap after reading a book on the life of Father Damien. Went in swimming just before sundown, and while we were in, someone yelled, "Shark!" And in my hurry to get to the beach, I wrenched my neck, and so here I am again with one of my old favorite stiff necks. Dr. Gardner has one also, so we have each other to console. I went over and gave him a good massage, and he said that he felt much better, but if his is anything like mine, massaging isn't going to do it much good.
This just in. Oakland, California. The famed aviator, Amelia Earhart, left Oakland, California today, along with her navigator Fred Noonan on their first leg of their epic around-the-world flight. On board their Lockheed Electra aircraft, they will navigate through Miami, South America, Africa, India, Australia, Phoenix Islands in the South Pacific, Hawaii, and then back to California by the middle of June. This is Miss Earhart's second attempt to circumnavigate the globe in her highly modified aircraft.
Day 16, Friday, May 21st, 1937.
Up at 6:45 and to breakfast of scrambled eggs, which were just a bit strong. My neck is still stiff, but not as bad as it has been on numerous occasions. Busied myself all day today putting the finishing touches to the concrete pier in which is embedded 2 enameled American flags and 2 Hubbard medals of the National Geographic Society. You see, after the forms were removed, the finish is very rough and jagged, especially around the flags and medals, and also in many places where the concrete wasn't spaded and where the honeycomb forms. The concrete was very sandy and not of good texture, so I went all over it with a trowel and smoothed it off on all 4 sides, and then gave it a dressing with a paintbrush and a watery mixture of cement to keep it from crumbling. Goodness, it was hot today. I didn't get my nap in because once the work was started, it had to be finished. Finished at about 3:30, and then helped the boys signing. We caught about 80 fish in half an hour.
When we built our monument and mounted the 2 stainless steel American flags, it was the doctor who mixed some fine finishing concrete and smoothed and shaped our monument into a really handsome structure. On Decoration Day, we unveiled the monument with appropriate ceremonies.
Took a swim before supper. I certainly have a good appetite. I don't think I have gained a pound, though. One thing I have collected so far is a good coat of tan. Almost all of the heavy work has been finished, and from now on, I think there will be more time for recreation. All hands, including the doctor, have worked mighty hard during this past week. It is surprising to see a complete camp of 20 tents, mess tent, toilets, photographic laboratory of 3 rooms, concrete bases for all the instruments, all in the short space of 1 week. There is going to be a radio broadcast tomorrow, and only the scientists are going to take part. Captain Hellweg, Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Richtmeyer, and Dr. Dunham. They say that tomorrow is a bad day for broadcasting, so you may not be able to hear the program very well.
Day 17, Saturday, May 22nd, 1937.
Had a fairly good night's sleep and up at 7 for breakfast of ham and eggs. Again, the eggs were pretty ripe, but they haven't seemed to cause anyone any trouble yet. After fixing up the tent and airing out my bedclothes, I went down the beach with the Hawaiian boys and the cook with the fish net and caught about 20 fish in about an hour and a half. Brought them back to the mess tent, and I cleaned 3 rather long flat fish. It was quite breezy, and the studio was in one of the tents. The microphone they had to use on this day was a special one, and it had no permanent stand. So to prevent any accidents, I held it in place while Captain Hellweg, Dr. Mitchell, Dunham, and Richtmeyer spoke. The report was that the program was intelligible, but with a lot of static behind it all.
How do you do, America? This is George Hicks of the National Broadcasting Company with the National Geographic Society, United States Navy Eclipse Expedition in the South Sea Islands. We're at Canton Island of the Phoenix Group, 7,000 miles westward of New York and south of the equator 3 degrees. Each day, from sunrise to sunset, scientists have been laboring with huge but delicate apparatus for a definite time and purpose. Even now, Dr. McNally of Georgetown University, Dr. Gardner of the National Bureau of Standards, Mr. Thompson, and Mr. Willis are working out under the noonday sun. However, being away now well over a month, we're looking forward to the evening of May 25th, when NBC is sending us a program of news and music and words from our families. Signing off, George Hicks announcing this is a special series of the National Broadcasting Company.
After the program was over, we helped Dr. Gardner erected his telescopic camera, and then Captain Hellweg and I went along the beach picking up branches of coral and putting them on top of the heads of coral so that they would bleach out. Spent the rest of the afternoon round camp and then took a little nap just before it was time to take our evening swim. It certainly is refreshing to take a little swim in the cool water after facing this sun and heat and glare all day long.
This just in. Tucson, Arizona. Amelia Earhart's circumnavigation of the globe has taken another step forward when she successfully departed Tucson, Arizona today en route to New Orleans. Miss Earhart, along with her navigator, Fred Noonan, is expected to depart the United States about the 1st of June, then on to South America, and then to Africa.
Day 18, Sunday, May 23, 1937.
Up at 6:45 and gave Father McNally a hand at saying Mass. Finished it just before noon, and then into the tent for chicken and all the trimmings. Goodness is a hot one today. The Avocet is going to shove off at 2 in the morning for a trip up to Enderbury Island. I don't know just exactly what they wish to accomplish, but they are going up and will be back tomorrow night. About all they could do would be to plant an American flag and leave a note that the island was visited by the USS Avocet on May 24th. They left us plenty of water, so we won't miss anything more than the familiar sight of seeing the ship over the rim of coral any time that we look toward the sea. There have been lots of messages from the State Department asking about the ownership of these islands, and it seems that the British have annexed them all below the equator. Just after supper, we were all standing around in the semi-darkness. We saw lights of an approaching ship. Say it was just like a show. Everyone in the camp came out, and before long there was a different idea in nearly everyone's mind about what ship it might be and what its mission was. We all felt at first that it was the New Zealanders coming in, but as time passed we could see that it was a large passenger ship. And after signals passed from the Avocet, we intercepted the messages. We found that it was the RMS Niagara bound for Honolulu. What she was doing way out here off her regular course is still a matter of conjecture. The scientists believed that she brought the New Zealanders and dropped them off at Enderbury.
About 10 p.m., we made out a steamer's lights on the westward. Abruptly, she turned and headed in toward the island. Soon she was close enough to signal and announced that she was the RMS Niagara of the Canadian-Australasian Line, en route from Suva to Honolulu. Seeing the flares on a desert island, she had stood in to learn if we needed anything. When she first saw the flares, she could not see the ship's lights at anchor close in shore, and probably thought our range flares were signals for help. We thanked the captain, and he turned and went back on his course.
About 12 o'clock, a terrible rainstorm came up, and we thought that it was going to blow us off the island. I just moved my cot in a little closer to the middle of the tent and let it blow. I felt sure that it would blow at least half a dozen tents down. It blew my desk over and my typewriter fell out on the ground. I slept fitfully the rest of the night because of the flapping of the tent sides.
Day 19, Monday, May 24th, 1937.
It was decided to make a day's survey of Enderbury to get first-hand information about that island. Accordingly, certain members of the staff accompanied me on board the Avocet the night of May 23rd, as we were to make an early 2 a.m. start.
Up at 7:30 and into breakfast of ripe eggs. They are getting pretty strong now, and I don't believe they will be any good for any use any longer. After breakfast, came over to the tent and put the stakes back in the ground and realigned the tent. When my typewriter fell over, the sheets were thrown on the ground and the wind scattered them all over the place. It took me about 2 hours to find all the sheets. I felt sick to think that after going to all this trouble of keeping a daily record, I should lose the sheets so easily and through no fault of my own. It didn't take very long to find the majority, after an hour and a half of searching the ground in the vicinity of my tent and in the direction of the wind's course. I felt rather disgusted when I was unable to find 2 sheets, those written on the 13th and 17th, rested a while and then went back and in half an hour found both sheets. and so much to my joy I have the complete record again. You can bet that I shall keep them in a much safer place from now on.
The next morning at daylight, we were close aboard on the lee side of Enderbury Island. Lieutenant Williamson and I went ashore in the surf boat. The next boat brought Dr. McNally, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Hicks, and Mr. Brown. We divided into two parties, the captain, Hicks, and McNally taking the southern half of Enderbury, Stewart, Brown, and I taking the northern half. Enderbury was barren and extremely rough, its surface covered with loose, irregularly shaped bits of coral. As we walked, the loose surface kept slipping and sliding. Progress was slow and difficult. About the hole was an exaggerated odor of a chicken yard. Overhead was a constant and curious bird parade.
The camp was quite deserted this morning. This is certainly a vacation for me. Professionally, there hasn't been a damn thing to do out here that I am getting tired of this, and shall have my fill by the time we are ready to go back. I have acquired a good coat of tan on my back and legs, but wearing my shorts has left quite a light place on my thighs. So the day before yesterday, I went around with just my underwear on, and I got some fresh burn high on my thighs, and it is still quite tender. Had lunch, and with most of the men gone to Enderbury, there wasn't much loitering about the tent after we finished our meal. Adams, the NBC technician, and I took a walk down the beach with his .22 rifle to look for sharks to shoot at. We saw only several small ones in close enough to shoot at, and I hit the one I shot at, and it made the shark awfully sick. He stayed in about the same place and shook, and then slowly went out into deeper water. Woke up about 4 o'clock, and a little later watched the Avocet come back and anchor again. It was good to see her offshore again. She really gives us a feeling of security. The men came over in a boat a little later on and told us about their trip to Enderbury.